We're getting started with our new unit on photosynthesis. So we've talked about cells and we talked about how cells are set up and how things get in and out of cells. So now we got to talk about a really important part of how cells function, which is energy, right? If you think of any process in your life, think of anything in your life, whether it's a living organism or just a machine, and if you want to make it work, it needs energy, right? Even something like a hammer or, anything that's not even plugged into the wall, it needs energy, but it's going to be the energy that you provide to it, right? So anything that does something requires energy. And cells do a lot of things, so they require a lot of energy. And we're going to talk about how energy is produced. But the first thing we have to talk about is something called photosynthesis. And photosynthesis is a process in which plants undergo and some bacteria and microorganisms which allow them to make their own food. So we're not talking about making energy yet. We first have to talk about making food and then the fuel to make the energy. So plants are specialized to do something called photosynthesis, and that's what we're going to get into in this unit. So let's talk a little bit about that. So in order for life to exist, we need energy. And that's something that you are, I'm sure, aware of, like I just said. And the way we get energy is either by consuming other organisms, or some organisms are able to make their own energy, meaning they can make their own food, right? So let's take a look here at the two possibilities that we have. Something can be an autotroph or a heterotroph. An autotroph is an organism that's able to make its own food by using the energy from the sun. So they are able to absorb the energy from the sun, and then through chemical processes in the cells, they can convert molecules into sugar, and then they can use that sugar for energy. Heterotrophs, on the other hand, have to get their their food from something else. So they can't make their own food. We are heterotrophs, right? If you're hungry right now, you can't go sit outside, sit in the sun, absorb some sunlight, and then all of a sudden have a sandwich in your hands. It doesn't work that way. We have to actually go out and eat food. So autotrophs are able to make their own food through the sunlight, energy from the sun. And then heterotrophs have to consume their organic material for energy, and that is a heterotroph. Now, what is actual energy? Well, when we're talking about cells, the energy that gets used is a molecule called adenosine triphosphate, or ATP for short. And we're going to be talking a lot about ATP as we go through this unit and the next unit. But basically, it's what we consider the energy currency of the cell. So what's our currency? We use dollars, right? We use money. So if you want to go to the store and you want to buy something, you need to have money. You can't give them something else and say, oh, here's a bunch of, whatever you pick up off the ground and say, I want to give you this and I want that. No, you have to give the person money. That is our currency. Well, the cell's energy currency is ATP. Anytime a cell wants to do anything that requires energy, the energy that we're talking about is this molecule. So when we break down food, we release energy in the form of ATP, and that's how we do things. Okay, let's go a little farther. So, what is photosynthesis? Well, the term photosynthesis, if you look at the word, you can break it into two. Photo means light, okay? So like a photography means to basically to capture light is what a photograph is. Photosynthesis, photo means light, and synthesis means to make. So what is photosynthesis? Well, it's not to make light, it's to make sugar using light. Oops. So that's where that term comes from. So the definition right here is it's a process where energy from the sun, so sun's energy, carbon dioxide, and water are taken in, and those things are called reactants. They combine together and they produce this high energy sugar, which we call glucose. So glucose is a monosaccharide that is produced through photosynthesis. And how do we know all this, right? How do we know that photosynthesis exists? How do we know that photosynthesis functions the way it does? Well, because we have some scientists that figured it out for us. So we're going to talk about, for the remainder of this lecture, we're going to talk about some scientists and their discoveries. So let's get started. The first person that we're going to talk about is a gentleman named Jan van Helmont. And he was one of the first people to really look at plants and try to figure out what was going on there. And what he was known for, and what his big discovery was, is that plants need water, right? So he was the first person to really determine that plants need water. Now, he was right about that, but he was wrong about what he thought they did with it. So he was under the impression that plants absorbed water and then grew. So like if you were to put a plant in water, that's what makes it grow. And if there's no water, it won't grow. Well, that is true. If there's no water, it won't grow. But it doesn't grow because it's absorbing water. It uses the water to make the energy to grow. So if you look at this little image down here, what Jan van Helmont would have thought is this plant, the reason why it's getting larger is just like a sponge. It absorbs water and it expands in size. You may remember being a little kid and getting, I remember these things existed. I don't know if they exist now, but there were these little tiny like animals that were little tiny hard sponges. And you put them in water and then they expand and they become these, animals or whatever thing it is that you have in there. That's kind of what Jan van Helmont thought about plants. They absorb the water and then they expand in size. Okay, the next person we're going to talk about is a gentleman named Joseph Priestley, who is sporting a wicked mullet in this picture. He is a serious looking individual. He made a very important discovery, and that is that plants produce oxygen as a byproduct. So how did he figure this out? Well, he did it in a way that, might be somewhat controversial, but unfortunately, one of the things that you need to make discoveries is sometimes to use animal models and to use animals as subjects on tests. So one of those examples would be right here. And what Priestley did was he did an experiment where he took two mice, or it could have been the same mouse, but in two different trials. In the first one, he sealed the mouse off to the outside environment so that there was no air getting in or out. And he put that mouse into the sealed environment with a plant, and that mouse lived for hours, right? That mouse lived for a while. He did the same exact thing. He did the experiment again, but this time he put no plant, and that mouse died within minutes. It did not live very long at all. So he did this many times, and he determined through that process that something must be keeping this mouse alive, and that thing is oxygen, and it's the plant that is giving it off. So that was a big discovery on his part. And then finally, we have Jan Ingenhousz, who is another serious-looking individual down here, and he did a very similar experiment that Priestley did, except he did this with light either being there or not being there. So he performed the same experiment, but this time he put the plant in in an environment without light. And what he found was the mouse died instead of living with the plant. So what that told him was that the only time that plant was able to produce oxygen is if light is present. So we had three scientists come up with three important discoveries. Jan van Helmont determined that plants use water. That was the first big discovery. Priestley, secondly, he determined that plants give off oxygen, so he knew that existed. And then finally, Jan Ingenhousz determined that plants also need light in order for this whole process to happen. So all three of these scientists together really came up with a big discovery, which is the equation for photosynthesis. So this is what we're going to end the lecture with here. Just quickly, I'm going to go through what's happening with this equation. So a chemical equation is just like a math equation where you have things going in and things coming out. So for example, if I were to write 2 plus 2 equals 4, that is the same thing as I'm writing here in terms of setting up this, you can call it a problem in a sense. It's an equation. So if I were to write 2 plus 2, and if this arrow was an equal sign and this was a 4 here, the reactants are what go in and the products are what come out. So for example, in this example here, the reactants for the photosynthesis equation are 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, 6 molecules of water, and sunlight. So those are the three things that have to go in. And that is what the three scientists discovered, right? Jan van Helmont figured out that the water was there. And then, Priestley determined that oxygen was given off, but at the same time, in order for oxygen to get given off, carbon dioxide has to go in. So the mouse is breathing out carbon dioxide, so the carbon dioxide goes in, and then Ingenhousz determined that light was necessary. So these are the three reactants. And then what gets given off as a product? Well, you get two things as products. One is going to be glucose, C6H12O6. Hopefully that looks familiar to you from the macromolecule unit. And then finally, it also gives off 6 molecules of oxygen. And that is extremely important because that is what we breathe in. So before plants existed on the planet, there was no oxygen. When life first started on planet Earth, there was no oxygen. And the first form of life that existed was anaerobic, which means it did not use oxygen. And then as plants started to develop, oxygen got released into the environment and life changed. And now almost all life uses oxygen. So plants have the reactants of carbon dioxide, water, and light, and they go into this equation, and what you get as a product is glucose and oxygen. And down here, that just shows you an image. This is basic photosynthesis. Carbon dioxide and water come in with the energy of the sun, and what you get as a byproduct is sugar for the plant and then oxygen. So thank you very much.